This morning I woke up, and like most modern adults, I found out through a meme on Instagram that Ukraine and Russia had a case of full-blown war. I always knew the world would end with all of us laughing, so I had some coffee and learned through my top secret open source intelligence app, TikTok, the exact location of Russian troop movements in real time. This is just the kind of bizarre reality that we live in now with modern warfare. My goal with this video is to provide you with the consolidated information of all the most important live updates on the war. Now, if we look at the live update conflict map, we can get a clear picture of where Russian troop movements are happening inside of Ukraine. The conflict map is kind of like a weather map of doom. Today we have a 110% chance of Russian invasion from the east, and a 15% chance of invasion from the armored presence building up in Belarus in the north. All of this is precipitated by a 150,000 Russian soldier movement that has been a driving force for this invasion since last month. We can click on information at any location on the map to see what regular people have uploaded on the ground. For instance, there's reports of a downed Russian Ka-52 attack helicopter that Ukrainian forces shot down near Hostomel military airport. We have live video updates of Russian helicopters doing an air assault on the Hostomel airport today, Thursday, February 24th. Here we have video of a Ukrainian MiG-29 at the bottom of the screen in a dogfight with a Russian Su-35 near the capital Kiev. Kind of given up on looking at the mainstream media to find live updates of these type of conflicts. Instead, I'm turning to Twitter to find this, which is normally only good for inane arguments, but here it shows its true value, where we can see live updates of the Russian military gearing up to launch an armored northern front across the border, where they're close to Ukraine's capital Kiev. There's a high-speed avenue of approach there, a highway that connects Belarus to Ukraine from the north, which is perfect for a tank invasion. But it's possible that the Ukrainian military has set up ambushes and anti-tank missile systems there to counter this strategy. A citizen on the ground in Ukraine uploaded this video. It appears to be a large explosion of an ammunition depot, a warehouse for the armed forces of Ukraine in Kalinikov in the Vinnytsia region. Ukraine cannot afford to lose that ammunition right now. Back at the map, we can click on any icon to see a live update of the combat situation as it unfolds in Ukraine. We can see an hour ago, Ukrainian state border guards are engaged in combat with Russian troops on the outskirts of Sumy, trying to repulse the attacks. 7 hours ago, we see a report that confirmed everyone's suspicions of how the Russian military doctrine would play out. The command and control point at Niezhian airfield was blown up, according to the armed forces of Ukraine. A military invasion is underway. Here's a report on the border from 26 minutes ago. According to the Joint Forces Command in the Kharkov area, the Ukrainian army used javelins and neutralized a column of 15 Russian T-72 tanks. We also have reports 8 hours ago of a tank column entering Ukraine from Belarus. This means they're opening up a northern front. All early indications point to Ukraine putting up as much of a fight as they can muster, with one unit reporting that they destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 2 T-72 tanks already. When I deployed to Iraq, we nicknamed our squad Spare Parts, because we were cobbled together from backfills who'd been out for years, reclassified soldiers, and brand new know-nothing rookies like myself. And in a way, the Ukrainian military reminds me of a spare parts army. Ukraine has been working hard to cobble together reserve soldiers, training regular civilians to be actual troops with just a couple of hours of training on a rifle. Anyone who's willing to fight in Ukraine is taking up arms to fight off this Russian invasion. Ukraine has a spare parts military, and they might not win the war. But take it from me, as an average Iraq war veteran, that occupying a country isn't as easy as you might think. Ukraine's president spoke shortly after the invasion began, and he said that his government is issuing arms to anyone who's capable and willing to handle them. He's encouraging Ukrainians to fight for their country. Zelensky has officially severed all relations with Russia and claims that that country has chosen to act in the same evil way that Germany did in World War II. But don't worry, if you're not physically able to pick up arms and fight, now it looks like the Ukrainian military has a new MOS, a job that I'm guessing is going to be called 95 Zulu. It's a meme warfare specialist, so you can fight the good fight to win the war of public opinion. Me, after seeing World War III trending once again, chuckles, I'm in danger. That just about sums up how most of us feel. Like we're completely out of control and this thing is just unfolding and we have to watch from the sidelines. Thank God the pandemic is finally over. Putin hits World War III button. I don't know when it ended. I mean, for me, it seems like we're just piling on these catastrophes on top of each other at this point. When you're laughing about World War III trending on Twitter and suddenly the sun comes out at 11:45 p.m. If only we had memes like this to help get us through the Iraq War. So this whole Russia-Ukraine situation began in earnest just a few days ago, Monday, February 21st, when Russia deployed what they called peacekeeping operation into eastern Ukraine. Calling that a peacekeeping force is kind of doublespeak at best, right? This was a prelude to a military invasion that had been planned for months, possibly years. Listen, I was part of the war in Iraq where we called our invasion a preemptive one. You can't bullshit a bullshitter. The United States told the UN Security Council that this Russian military peacekeeping force and Moscow's recognition of Ukraine's breakaway region as independent was simply a pretext for war. It turns out this morning that the US was correct, and yet at this moment, I don't really feel much like saying I told you so. As the tanks roll through Ukraine, one question has been raised. Why do all the Russian tanks have this mysterious Z spray painted on them? Russia doesn't even have the letter Z in its alphabet. Quit appropriating the English language. Some experts believe that this is to prevent friendly fire incidents from happening, because the Russian T-72 main battle tank looks a lot like the Ukrainian T-80 from a distance. Unless you're one of those Cav Scout nerds who studies how to identify tanks in their spare time. Jeff Schogel wrote a great article about this for Task and Purpose, and this aspect of the invasion, where he spoke to former Marine Captain Rob Lee, who spent a year with the defense think tank in Moscow. Captain Lee believes that these Z spray-painted markings are something new, to indicate a different type of task force or echelon in the Russian military. So it could be a symbol to help these units get routed to the correct locations, the correct areas that they're supposed to be in. These two areas of Ukraine that Russia initially moved into are now being called the Donetsk People Republic and the Luhansk People Republic by Putin. Not very creative, can't we just call one of them a federation? They collectively make up what is called the Donbas region of Ukraine, and it's the most eastern part of the country closest to Russia. It's where the Ukrainian army has been fighting a civil war against anti-Ukrainian government Russian separatists for the past 8 years. Ukraine has lost over 14,000 soldiers there during this time. Now, whether Russia is justified in their invasion or not is up for debate, and in this video I want to explore that question. And I want to dive into the thoughts and actions of your regular Russian and Ukrainian soldiers right now. If you like this video so far, please fire off around with the like and subscribe button to support the channel. So Russia claims this conflict is the fault of the United States and NATO. From Putin's perspective, however genuine it might be, he says that the US backed a coup in Ukraine in 2014 when their president Viktor Yanukovych was pushed out of the country. Yanukovych was basically a Russian puppet. His family stole millions of dollars in corruption from the Ukrainian people. And people weren't too stoked on that in Ukraine. So they had a rebellion. But somehow, according to Putin, that's the US's fault. They had backed that coup, according to him. In 2011, when Putin's sham election led to a protest by his own people in his own country, he claimed that this was the work of Hillary Clinton. And she might be guilty of any number of things, but in all likelihood, not that. So after Yanukovych left Ukraine, was pushed out in 2014, the country turned heavily towards the West and NATO to protect them from Russia. Russia took over Crimea and the conflict in the Donbas region started. Since then, Putin has had his eye on taking over Ukraine, and we need to give the devil his due here and look at why that is. So from his perspective, it's unreasonable for NATO to have their forces so close to his backyard. Oh, are you serious? Is that NATO in my backyard again? Honey, come over here. NATO's in the backyard again. Get out of the rose bushes, NATO. Scram. Go back to Poland. Yeah, I don't know. You serious? Are they serious? Historically speaking, any foreign military operating in Ukraine has a geographic advantage to invade or pressure Russia. And we've seen Germany and France attempt an invasion exactly like that on Russia in the past. Putin saw the breakup of the Soviet Union as, quote, the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the century. Okay, sure, possibly. Just go ahead and ignore how awful it was when the Backstreet Boys broke up. At around 5 a.m. this morning, after building up over 150,000 troops on Ukraine's border, Russian forces launched their attack.
Whoever would try to stop us and create further threats to our country, to our people, should know that Russia's response will be immediate and lead you to such consequences that you have never faced in your history.
Wonder what consequence he's alluding to there. Was that the world's first passive-aggressive nuclear threat? Just come out and say it. Just straight up say you're willing to toast the world over this. A volley of standoff missile attacks struck command and control facilities, air defense sites, and air bases in Ukraine this morning. Explosions were reported in the capital, Kiev. This effort was done specifically to disable Ukraine's ability to put up any kind of coordinated defensive plan, because your regular soldiers on the ground would be cut off from leadership in headquarters. If they didn't have a solid plan in place yet, they're in trouble. Hitting your enemy's command and control causes disorientation and confuses their forces. According to Tyler Rajaway of the War Zone, he said, quote, "The widespread use of land attack cruise missiles from Russia was especially clear, along with long-range anti-radiation missiles used to knock out radar sites. Special operations also appeared to have played a major part in these operating maneuvers that were largely focused on shaping the battlefield for what was still to come." So we're currently looking at a multi-front ground offensive against Ukraine's northeastern border with Russia. It looks like the Russian plan is to trap Ukrainian forces that are concentrated in the east. This would destroy their supply lines that reach out from the west of the country, and it would leave the capital of Kiev wide open to attack from the north, where Russian soldiers are stationed in Belarus. This all but confirms that everyone's worst fears have been realized. Russian special operations are moving behind enemy lines to paint Ukrainian military targets for missile strikes. On the open source intelligence tool, the Live Conflict Map, we see Ukrainian forces reported 5 hours ago that they had captured multiple Russian POWs. Ukrainian President Zelensky declared martial law in Ukraine today. It's important for us to talk about what exactly is the average Ukrainian soldier's perspective in this war. Now, they believe they're fighting for their country's independence and freedom against an authoritarian government. This very personal reason for defending one's own land and freedom from Ukraine's point of view gives them a psychological advantage. Normally, as a rule of thumb for your invading or attacking force, in the military you want to have a 3-to-1 numerical advantage, because dislodging a defensive force historically can be very difficult. From the Ukrainian government's point of view, they've wanted to join NATO since 1992, but there are strict stipulations for joining, including not having any territorial disputes and to be unanimously accepted by all the other NATO states. Ultimately, Ukraine wants to join NATO so that they can join the European Union for its economic and security benefits. They see a partnership with Russia as being less ideal for their future. So where does this leave the United States military in all of this? How is the US going to respond? If they do nothing, they'll look weak AF. If they do too much, then we'll be living underground for the next few decades. Now, did Russia call NATO's bluff here? NATO's tacit implication has been that they might defend Ukraine. And you have to remember, if the US does nothing here, it could embolden China to think that they could take Taiwan without any problem as well. Now, our Pentagon reporter Jeff Schogel reported the following about the US military's response. This was at 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. And he said, quote, "Where things stand now, NATO has activated its defense plans, but it has not yet activated a NATO response force, which would include US troops. Nolan Peterson is tweeting that Russian troops are a few miles from Kiev. There is fighting around Chernobyl, and I don't know if the power plant has been damaged," end quote. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, then you know we've been covering in detail Russia's military modernization efforts. They've spent $700 billion on upgrading their forces over the past few years, over the past decade. And at the time, I wasn't sure why they were spending so much money on their forces. It was possible they just wanted to keep pace with the United States technology. But it's clear to us now that Putin had designs on building a force that would ensure him victory in Ukraine. He upgraded the regular infantry's primary weapon to the AK-12, fitted with modern day and night fighting optics that augment a soldier's normal combat abilities. He fully upgraded his troops' body armor, which the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan proved were a very effective investment. From the Russian perspective, they believe that Ukraine's refusal to renounce any plans to join NATO is unacceptable. They also listed that Ukraine is seeking to develop weapons of mass destruction, which is just a classic geopolitical play. You almost have to admire that little homage to past invasions. What a tip of the cap, thank you, Russia. Putin claimed he's not looking to occupy Ukraine and that they are instead looking to demilitarize it, which is exactly how most military occupations like to start. Hey Putin, I've got a 32-page US counterinsurgency PDF saved on my old Iraq hard drive. If you'd like to steal a play out of that, it's actually not a bad read. So when you look at the open source intelligence tools that are tracking US surveillance aircraft, they've noted that they're flying on the western border of Belarus and Ukraine, which is likely at the very edge of their sensor capabilities, their max range. And there are multiple reports right now that there's a run on ATMs in the country where people are trying to keep cash on hand through the war. At this point, the Russian stock market is down an insane 45%, but if the invasion goes the way they're planning, we can expect to see that reverse. And this shows us just how much of a bet Russia is willing to take on this war, and how much Putin feels like not having Ukraine is an existential threat to Russia's existence, whether you agree with that or not. I tend not to. A little after I got back from Iraq, my unit mobilized for a month-long training event to one of the Baltic states in Latvia in 2010. I stayed on an old former Soviet tank base. You could see the old hammer and sickle, the old Red Star logos that were faded and paint chipping off of them everywhere. And I'll never forget this bizarre conversation that I had with one of the local civilians, and this guy was old enough to remember what it was like to live under Soviet rule. And he kept asking me and my squad leader, he asked everyone, what would the United States military do if Russia wanted to come back and take their independence away? The reason I won't forget it is because this person genuinely looked terrified of the prospect of going back under Russian control. I told him the question was way above my pay grade, and honestly, I laughed afterwards, which I feel completely stupid for today. I laughed because in 2010 it seemed absurd that Russia would want to recreate the Soviet Union. Clearly, I feel stupid for thinking that now. And to answer that gentleman from Latvia's question, 12 years later, now it appears the US military is responding to Russian invasion by gathering their forces in the surrounding region. So there's at least 10,000 US soldiers in the Baltic states and Poland. There are at least a total of 90,000 US service members in Europe to shore up defenses against Russia possibly moving further into Europe. This is to counter what I think is an irrational fear. So some people are worried that US soldiers could get pulled into a larger war here. I don't think this is going to happen. They're there as a show of force to prevent Russian forces from moving further into Ukraine past Ukrainian border. Everyone on TikTok who's terrified at the prospects of being drafted into World War III can calm down. I'm sure I'll be eating those words 2 weeks from now when I get called back up for my old striker unit. I know as well as the next average infantryman how horrible the realities of war are on the ground. That kind of suffering and hardship that Russian and Ukrainian troops are going through right now is horrifying. I'm not so naive as to think that all Russian soldiers are bad or all Ukrainian soldiers are bad, because the reality is most grunts, like how I was, are regular people that are just there to support their family or as a way to earn money to better their lives and to create a safer future for their country. That's what they are thinking. That's each side's perspective here. The same is true for the Ukrainian soldiers. Rarely does any side see themselves as the bad guys. There's a lot more I want to say about the developing situation in Ukraine, and I plan to make more follow-up videos if you guys are interested. I don't claim to have all the right answers here. I encourage you to look up other sources of information and comment below with your thoughts, because I'll be spending the rest of the day today talking with you guys in the comment section to try to make better sense of what exactly is happening right now and what it means for the rest of us. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. You're watching Task and Purpose. Check out this video while you're here.